I still remember the first night it started, and I wish I could erase that memory forever. I was living in a quiet countryside town in Oregon, far from the noise of cities, hoping to find peace after years of stress. My cabin was small but cozy, surrounded by pines that whispered whenever the wind blew. It felt safe, ordinary, almost forgettable. But that illusion shattered one night when I heard the knocking. It was just after midnight when the sound came. 3 slow knocks against my front door. I was half asleep on the couch, and at first, I thought I had imagined it. But then it came again, 3 deliberate thuds that seemed to echo through the silence. My chest tightened. Nobody ever came to my cabin at night. I lived miles away from my nearest neighbor, and even they wouldn't dare to drive out here so late. I forced myself to the door, every instinct screaming to stay back. When I peeked through the small window, my breath caught. No one was there. Only the trees swayed in the dim light of the porch lamp. I opened the door cautiously, just to be sure, and stepped out. The night was unnervingly still, yet the smell of damp earth and pine needles filled the air. I glanced at the ground, and that's when I saw it. A muddy handprint pressed low against the wooden door frame. Not a footprint, a handprint, smeared as if someone or something had dragged its hand across my wall. I backed inside immediately, bolted the door, and tried to calm myself down. Maybe a hiker? Maybe some kids playing a prank? But none of it made sense. Nobody was hiking at midnight in freezing temperatures, and kids didn't wander this deep into the woods. I tried to sleep, though sleep felt impossible. My cabin creaked and groaned, like it always did. But that night, every sound was amplified. The ticking of the old clock, the faint rustle of branches against a window, the hum of the refrigerator. Everything felt alive, like the house itself was holding its breath with me. And then, around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, like someone murmuring right outside my window. I froze in bed, straining to hear. The whispers rose and fell, almost like chanting, though I couldn't understand a single word. My pulse raced. I slid out of bed and crept to the window, careful not to make a sound. Slowly, I pulled back the curtain. Nothing. Just the same moonlit trees, swaying softly. But when I pressed my ear to the glass, I swear I could hear it clearer. Low, guttural whispers, as though multiple voices were speaking at once, in some language I had never heard before. That's when I made the mistake of shining my flashlight outside. The beam cut through the darkness, slicing across the trees, and for a split second, I saw them. Figures. Tall, pale figures, standing perfectly still among the pines. Their bodies were thin, unnaturally elongated, their faces blank, as though someone had painted them white. The moment the light touched them, they shifted, vanishing deeper into the woods with a swiftness that didn't seem human. I stumbled back from the window, my hands trembling. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, exhaustion, paranoia, but the muddy handprint, the knocks, the whispers, they were too real to dismiss. Something was out there. Something was watching me. By morning, the woods looked ordinary again. Birds chirped, the sun warmed the porch, and I almost believed it had all been a nightmare. But when I stepped outside, I noticed something new. Carved into the wooden siding of my cabin, just below my bedroom window, were 3 words scratched deep into the wood. We see you. The words carved into my cabin wall haunted me all day. "We see you." I couldn't stop staring at them. My first thought was that someone was messing with me. Maybe some stranger trying to scare me off. But the deeper I thought about it, the less it made sense. No one even knew I had moved into this cabin, at least not anyone outside of the realtor who sold it to me. I'd chosen this place specifically because it was isolated. That night, I made sure every door and window was locked. I even shoved a chair under the doorknob like I had seen in movies. For hours, I sat in the living room with every light on, clutching the heaviest flashlight I owned as if it were a weapon. I told myself they wouldn't come back. But fear doesn't listen to reason. It crawls under your skin and makes every second unbearable. By midnight, the forest outside had gone quiet. Too quiet. Usually, I could hear owls, crickets, or the rustle of small animals moving in the brush. But that night, the silence was absolute, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath again. And then the knocking came. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, exactly like before. My chest tightened. I froze in the middle of the room, flashlight in hand, pointing it toward the door. The knocks came again, this time louder, harder. I stepped closer, trying to peer through the peephole, but just like the night before, nothing. Nobody was there. I turned the light off for just a moment, hoping maybe I could see better in the dark, but instantly I regretted it. Out of the corner of my eye, through the living room window, I saw movement, something shifting just beyond the tree line. My hands shook as I switched the light back on, but by then, whatever I had seen was gone. The whispers returned too. This time, they weren't outside. They were inside. It was faint at first, like a breath brushing against my ears. I spun around, shining the flashlight through the cabin, but nothing was there. The voices grew louder, overlapping each other. Gibberish, yet somehow intentional, as if they were trying to form words I couldn't comprehend. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, even the ceiling. I bolted into the bedroom, slammed the door shut, and pressed my back against it. My heart hammered in my chest. I could still hear them whispering all around me. I covered my ears, but that didn't help. The voices weren't just sounds, they were inside my head. And then, as quickly as they came, they stopped. Silence swallowed the cabin again. My hands were trembling so badly that I dropped the flashlight. Its beam rolled across the floor and landed on the far corner of the room. That's when I saw it. A shadow, not mine. Something crouched in the corner, its form barely visible, darker than the dark around it. It was tall, hunched, its limbs impossibly long. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, and the shadow moved, stretching upward until it nearly touched the ceiling. I wanted to scream, but fear locked my throat. Suddenly, the shadow collapsed inward, as if it had melted into the floor. I scrambled to grab the flashlight, shining it across the room. Nothing, just empty walls. But when I turned toward the window, I wished I hadn't. Outside, pressed against the glass, was a face. It wasn't human, not entirely. His skin was pale and tight, stretched like wax over bone. His eyes were black, completely black, with no whites at all. And it was smiling, not with joy, but with a twisted grin that showed too many teeth. I stumbled back, tripping over the bed, but before I could react further, the face vanished. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. I didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, I was convinced I needed to leave. But when I stepped outside, my blood ran cold. All around my cabin, Circling it, in the dirt, were hundreds of handprints, some small like a child's, others enormous, inhumanly large. They overlapped one another, pressed deep into the earth, encircling my home like a ritual, and carved into my porch, right beneath the welcome mat, were new words: "Don't leave." My first thought was to run to the nearest town, but my truck wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, the engine only sputtered, as if something had drained the life from it. I was trapped. As the day dragged on, I felt them watching me from the forest. Every time I glanced out the window, I caught glimpses of those pale figures standing among the trees, motionless, waiting. They never moved while I was looking directly at them. But when I turned away and looked back again, they would be closer. By dusk, they were at the edge of the yard. I locked myself inside, every curtain drawn, lights off, trying to hide. I crouched on the floor, barely daring to breathe, my ears straining for every sound. Hours passed in suffocating silence. Then, sometime after midnight, I heard the creak of the porch. They were here. The doorknob rattled, slow at first, then harder. I held my breath, praying the locks would hold. The rattling stopped, and for a moment, I thought they had gone. But then came the scratching. Nails or claws dragging across the wood, high-pitched and deliberate. I pressed my hands against my ears, tears streaming down my face. And then, clear as day, a voice spoke from the other side of the door. A man's voice, calm, gentle, almost familiar. "Open the door. We only want to talk." The voice on the other side of the door nearly broke me. It wasn't just any voice, it was my brother's. The same calm tone he used when we were kids, when he tried to convince me to sneak out of bed and play games in the middle of the night. But that was impossible. My brother had died 3 years ago. My stomach churned. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering to myself over and over, "It's not him. It's not him." But the voice spoke again, softer this time, almost pleading. "Please, let me in. I'm cold." Every muscle in my body screamed at me to resist. I knew if I opened that door, it wouldn't be my brother standing there. And yet, a small part of me wanted to believe. That's how fear works. It claws at your sanity until you can't tell what's real anymore. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I didn't dare move. My flashlight battery had long since died, leaving me in darkness, crouched against the wall. I must have sat there for hours, drifting in and out of half-conscious terror. When dawn finally came, I thought I had survived. The forest looked empty again. No faces at the window, no figures at the tree line. Maybe it was over. But then I saw the door. On the outside, carved deep into the wood, were the words, "Tonight." My body went cold. That day dragged on like a death sentence. I tried everything to prepare. I searched the cabin for anything I could use as a weapon, but there was nothing beyond kitchen knives and heavy furniture. My phone still had no signal. The truck sat dead in the driveway, as if the very forest itself had drained the life from it. I decided I would not wait for nightfall. I would run. With a backpack, stuffed with food, water, and a flashlight with fresh batteries, I stepped onto the porch just as the sun began to dip. The forest looked endless, menacing, but I couldn't stay. I started down the dirt road that led to town, forcing myself not to look over my shoulder. I lasted maybe 20 minutes before I heard the footsteps. Soft at first, then louder, more than one. I spun around, flashlight beams slicing through the trees, and froze. They were following me, dozens of them, pale figures, their black eyes glinting in the fading light. They didn't run. They didn't even walk normally. They glided, as if the ground beneath them wasn't real. And though they were slow, every time I turned back to look, they were closer. Panic overtook me. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, branches tearing at my clothes, my lungs burning. The road twisted and turned, but no matter how far I went, I could feel them behind me, surrounding me. The whispers returned too, louder than ever, filling the forest like a chorus of the damned. And then, up ahead, I saw lights. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks, but no, it was real. A gas station, glowing faintly.
Through the trees, salvation. I pushed harder, ignoring the stitch in my side, the blood pounding in my ears. When I finally burst through the tree line and stumbled into the parking lot, the whispers stopped. The figures were gone. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath, tears spilling down my face. The attendant inside stared at me through the glass, wide-eyed, as if I were some lunatic. But I didn't care. I was alive. For the first time in days, I felt safe. That night, I stayed at a cheap motel nearby. I locked the door, turned on the television for background noise, and let exhaustion drag me into sleep. But safety was an illusion. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze in bed, heart hammering. Slowly, I turned my head toward the motel window, and my blood ran cold. Pressed against the glass was a pale face, black eyes, too many teeth, and carved into the inside of the window, as if the glass itself had been etched from within, were the words, "You can't run." The whispers started again, not outside this time, but inside the room, surrounding me, closing in. And that's when I realized the truth. They had never wanted the cabin. They had wanted me.